Last week was nothing short of a nightmare for me, and even now, I'm struggling to make sense of it all. Honestly, I never thought something like this could happen to me, but life has a strange way of surprising you. Let me start from the beginning. My wife, Natalie, and I had been married for just over a year. To anyone looking from the outside, we were that picture-perfect couple who seemed to have everything figured out. But if things were really as perfect as they seemed, I wouldn't be sitting here telling this story. So, let me take you back to where this whirlwind began. It all started in October when Natalie got promoted at her job. I was thrilled for her. She'd earned it, no doubt about it. The pay raise was a nice perk, too, and I couldn't have been prouder. But the promotion came with a catch. She had to transfer to a new office, one farther from home and full of unfamiliar faces. At first, I thought the change might be good for her, maybe even exciting. I had no idea how quickly things would shift in ways I couldn't ignore. The timing of her promotion couldn't have been worse for me. As a software developer, the end of the year is crunch time. Deadlines stacked up, projects needing round-the-clock attention. I threw myself into my work, figuring that the long hours would pay off. Meanwhile, Natalie started spending more and more time with her new colleagues, especially a small group of women she became close to. They seemed to be out together constantly, grabbing drinks, celebrating milestones, or just unwinding after work. At first, I encouraged her. I wanted to be the supportive husband, not the type to hold her back or question her every move. But then things started to change. She began coming home later and later, and my unease grew with each passing week. The first real warning sign came on a chilly November evening. Natalie hadn't come home at her usual time, and when I tried calling and texting, there was no response for hours. My mind went into overdrive, imagining every worst-case scenario. When she finally walked through the door close to midnight, her cheeks were flushed, and she seemed a little out of sorts. "Where were you?" I asked, doing my best to keep my tone even. "Oh, Matt, I'm so sorry," she replied, her voice slightly slurred. "We were at Lisa's place for her birthday. I completely lost track of time." Her explanation seemed plausible enough, but something about the way she avoided my eyes and ignored her buzzing phone didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled deep in my chest. That night, as it turned out, was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Natalie's late nights became routine. Every time, there was a new excuse. A work function, a casual dinner, or some last-minute hangout. I tried to be patient, but the more it happened, the harder it became to push my doubts aside. One evening, after yet another unexplained delay, I decided enough was enough. I waited for her to get home and then sat her down at the kitchen table. "Natalie," I began, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "This isn't working. I need to understand why you're out so much and why you can't let me know where you are." She met my gaze, her expression defensive. "Matt, I don't see what the big deal is. I'm an adult. I don't need to check in with you every time I go somewhere." "It's not about checking in," I said, doing my best to stay calm. "It's about respect. We're married, Natalie. It's not unreasonable for me to expect you to let me know when you're running late or where you're going. This isn't about control. It's about trust." She rolled her eyes, and her response cut deeper than I expected. "If you really trusted me, we wouldn't even be having this conversation." Her words stung, but I pressed on. "This isn't about whether I trust you," I said firmly. "It's about how your actions are making me feel. I feel like I'm no longer a priority. Like these outings and your friends matter more than our marriage." The argument dragged on for nearly an hour. Both of us went back and forth, trying to make the other understand. By the end of it, Natalie finally agreed to scale back her evening activities, but something had already shifted between us. The damage, as they say, was done. For a few weeks, Natalie held up her end of the bargain, but it didn't take long for me to notice the shift. She stuck to the agreement, but I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. Her smiles became rare, conversations grew shorter, and the affection she used to show so freely seemed to dwindle. Then came the day of my promotion. I was ecstatic, not just for the career boost, but because I finally had the chance to spend more time at home. Natalie had often complained that my work pulled me away too much, and I thought this was the perfect chance to refocus on our relationship. But as life tends to do, it threw a curveball I never saw coming. That afternoon, I left work early, excited to share the news and celebrate with Natalie. I had a whole evening planned, a nice dinner out, maybe even a chance to reignite the connection that had started slipping away. I stepped into the house quietly, hoping to catch her off guard with the surprise. But instead of the warm welcome I imagined, I heard her voice coming from the kitchen. I don't know if he suspects anything. He's been too wrapped up in work to notice. But we need to be careful. The words stopped me cold. My stomach twisted, and my pulse pounded in my ears. I froze in place, thoughts racing. Who was she talking to? What didn't I notice? Without thinking, I walked straight into the kitchen. Natalie's face turned pale the second she saw me. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, my voice steady even though I felt anything but calm. She laughed, but the sound felt forced. "Matt, relax. It's nothing. Just a colleague. We're planning a surprise for a friend's birthday." Her answer made sense on the surface, but the way she fidgeted didn't sit right with me. "Why did you sound so secretive?" Natalie let out a sigh, rolling her eyes. "Because it's a surprise. Come on, Matt. You're reading too much into this." I felt ridiculous for pressing the issue. Maybe I was overreacting. "Sorry. I guess I misunderstood," I said, trying to smooth things over. She gave me a small smile, but something about it felt hollow. "It's fine. Let's not make this bigger than it is. Okay?" I nodded and let it slide, but the uneasiness never fully left. As the weeks passed, the distance between us only seemed to widen. Natalie was glued to her phone more than ever, texting late at night and chuckling at jokes I wasn't part of. When her company announced a pre-Christmas party, my gut twisted. "It's important for work, Matt," she said when I hesitated about her going. "Everyone who matters will be there. I'll be back early, I promise." I agreed, but something still felt off. On the evening of the party, I drove her to the country house where it was being held. As we pulled into the driveway, my phone buzzed. A friend calling to congratulate me on the promotion. I stayed in the car, chatting for a few minutes while watching Natalie head toward the entrance. That's when I saw him. A man stood at the door waiting. As she approached, he greeted her with a warm smile, his hand resting a little too comfortably on the small of her back as they stepped inside. My chest tightened, but I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was imagining things, making something out of nothing. Still, I couldn't shake it. Later that evening, when I got home, my eyes landed on Natalie's laptop sitting on the desk in our study. The thought crossed my mind. If there was ever a time to ease my doubts, this was it. But fate once again had other ideas. Driving home from work the next day, I hit standstill traffic. A major accident had clogged the highway, and by the time I walked through the front door, exhaustion hit me like a wall. The idea of snooping through her laptop felt like too much effort. I collapsed onto the couch, ready to let the whole thing go, at least for the night. A sudden knock at the door snapped me out of it. When I opened it, Natalie's sister, Brooke, stood there. Her face was pale, her eyes darting nervously. "Brooke, what are you doing here?" I asked, taken aback by the unexpected visit. "Can I come in?" Her voice wavered. I stepped aside and let her inside. Brooke paced back and forth in the living room, wringing her hands until I finally broke the silence. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" She turned to face me, tears welling in her eyes. "Matt, I didn't know how to say this, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. Natalie, she's cheating on you." Her words hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. I stood there, frozen, as the weight of betrayal settled over me. Brooke, Natalie's own sister, stood in front of me, confirming the very thing I had tried so hard to ignore. In that moment, the air felt heavier, and the walls of our home didn't feel so familiar anymore. I had been completely blind, handing Natalie my trust on a silver platter while she quietly led a double life. The worst part was, Brooke worked at the same company, which gave her words a weight I couldn't ignore. She detailed how Natalie's behavior began shifting the moment she settled into her new office. The so-called friends she'd been spending time with had a reputation for living recklessly. According to Brooke, one of them was even in an open marriage. Natalie didn't stand a chance of resisting that kind of influence. It wasn't long before Brooke began noticing how often Natalie gravitated toward a certain male coworker. "That's the guy," I muttered, recalling the voice I'd overheard during that strange phone call weeks earlier. Brooke's eyes dropped to the floor, clearly uncomfortable. I didn't want to assume the worst, but at the company party, she hesitated, and I gave her a gentle nudge to continue. "They weren't even trying to hide it, Matt," she said, her voice thick with sympathy. "They were practically glued to each other, laughing, whispering, and well," she exhaled slowly, her eyes locking with mine. "I saw them kiss, and later, they disappeared into one of the bedrooms." My fists tightened at my sides as the weight of it all sank in. The woman I had poured my love and loyalty into had disrespected our vows in the most humiliating way. Despite the ache in my chest, I thanked Brooke for being honest. Her words didn't soften the blow, but at least I knew the truth now. Without wasting another second, I grabbed Natalie's laptop from the desk. If there was anything else I needed to see, it would be there. I didn't have to search long. A string of texts between Natalie and her friends unraveled right in front of me. Jokes about how oblivious I was, messages laced with flirtation and hidden meanings from that coworker, and plans laid out like it was second nature to sneak around. There were inside jokes about me, like I was some clueless fool for trusting her. It was all there, undeniable, disgusting, and enough to rip my heart out of my chest. I shut the laptop with a snap, hands trembling as rage boiled beneath the surface. Then, like a ghost from the past, a thought crept into my mind. One I hadn't let myself entertain in years. Before Natalie and I became serious, there had been a flicker of something between Brooke and me. We were both young, testing the waters, but just as anything meaningful could take root, Natalie swooped in. She had a way of making sure she got what she wanted. I never questioned it before, but now, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the wrong choice all along. Brooke sat quietly across from me, visibly uneasy but still offering her support. Without much thought, I got up, grabbed the old whiskey bottle I kept tucked away for tough days, and poured us both a glass. "To clarity," I muttered, raising my drink with a bitter smile. Brooke lifted her glass gently. "To honesty." We sat for hours, talking late into the night. I let loose, venting about all the times I had ignored the signs and bent over backward trying to keep the marriage afloat. Brooke listened, nodding in understanding. She admitted she had always seen Natalie as selfish, manipulative even, but never felt it was her place to say anything. As the whiskey flowed, so did our words, and eventually, our frustrations began to twist into something else. All the hurt and resentment we'd been holding in, it found an escape. Before I even registered what was happening, Brooke and I were in bed together. The next morning, I was jolted awake by a sharp scream that cut through the air like a knife. "What the hell is going on here?" Natalie's voice trembled with fury as she stood in the doorway, her eyes blazing. I sat up, groggy but unflinching. "Exactly what it looks like, Natalie." Her gaze darted between me and Brooke, who was hastily covering herself with the sheet, her face burning red with shame. Natalie's face twisted in disbelief. "How could you? With my sister?" Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as she glared at me. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, standing tall as I faced her. "Don't you dare play the victim," I said coldly. "I know all about you and your coworker. You've been cheating on me for months, probably longer. So don't stand there and act outraged." Her anger flickered into something else. Panic. "Matt, I can explain," she stammered. "It wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything." "Save it," I snapped. "I've seen the texts. I know about the party. You made your decisions, Natalie. Now I'm making mine." Her legs gave out, and she crumbled into a chair, sobbing into her hands. And just like that, whatever connection we once had was gone. "Matt, please. We can fix this," Natalie pleaded, her voice trembling with desperation. "I'll quit my job. We'll do whatever it takes. Just don't throw everything away." I shook my head, my tone steady and firm. "You threw it away the second you chose to betray me, Natalie. There's no coming back from that." Her eyes darted to Brooke, and the panic on her face quickly twisted into anger. "And you? How could you? You're my sister." To Brooke's credit, she didn't flinch. She met Natalie's glare head-on. "How could you do this to him?" she shot back. "You've treated Matt like nothing for months and expected me to stand by and say nothing? I'm not the villain here, Natalie. You are." Without another word, Natalie stormed out, slamming the door behind her hard enough to rattle the frame. That night, I packed my bags. It wasn't some impulsive decision fueled by anger. I just couldn't stay in that house, not with the memories hanging over me like a fog. The life we'd built there was a lie, and I needed space to breathe. I found a small apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to sit with my thoughts and start piecing together the next steps. A few days later, I called Natalie to let her know I was filing for divorce. Her response? Baffling. "Matt, no. Please, don't do this," she said, her voice cracking. "It's not too late. We can talk. We can fix this." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "Fix this?" I repeated, ice in my tone. "You cheated on me, Natalie. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed our marriage." "It wasn't like that," she insisted. "It was fleeting, a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I love you, Matt. I just needed to blow off some steam." A fleeting thing? I could hardly believe the words coming out of her mouth. Her betrayal wasn't just some random mistake. It was deliberate, calculated, and now she was trying to brush it off like it was nothing. I wasn't about to argue over the phone. I agreed to meet with her, not to entertain the idea of reconciliation, but because I needed to get the divorce moving and handle the logistics in person. We met at a coffee shop we used to visit when we were dating. I found it ironic, fitting even, that we were sitting there now to untangle the mess of what had once been our relationship. First, things stayed civil. We talked about dividing assets, legal procedures, and how to move forward without dragging it out. I thought maybe we could handle it like adults, but I had underestimated Natalie. Out of nowhere, she shifted gears, leaning in with a strange glint in her eye. "Matt, have you ever thought about how the world is changing?" she began. I raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about? Relationships aren't what they used to be," she continued, a little too eagerly. "Monogamy isn't for everyone anymore. Open relationships are normal now. They let people explore while staying committed. Maybe we've just been looking at this all wrong." I stared at her, struggling to process the nonsense coming out of her mouth. "Wait, are you seriously suggesting we modernize our marriage by pretending none of this ever happened?" "Yes," she said, her eyes lighting up as if she'd struck gold. "We could start over. No secrets, no lies. We'd set boundaries. Could work." I couldn't sit there any longer. I pushed back my chair and stood up, cutting her off mid-sentence. "This conversation is over, Natalie," I said flatly. "You're trying to dress up betrayal like it's some progressive idea. I'm not interested." Her face darkened as I walked away, but before I made it to the door, I heard her mutter under her breath, "You'll regret this." From that day forward, Natalie's tone toward me flipped like a switch. Her desperate pleas for another chance quickly curdled into full-blown hostility. The divorce became a war zone. She fought me at every turn, dragging out negotiations, challenging property division, and even attempting to use my one-night lapse with Brooke as leverage in court. But I wasn't backing down. I kept my cool, presented the evidence of her infidelity, and let my lawyer handle the rest. Despite her best efforts to twist the situation, the truth was on my side. The hearings stretched on for months, draining and exhausting. But in the end, the divorce was finalized. I walked out of that courtroom feeling lighter than I had in years. We split the marital assets right down the middle, and just like that, the chapter of Natalie in my life came to a definitive close. It felt strange at first, how quickly something that once felt permanent could be unraveled and divided like it was just paperwork. But there was no denying the sense of relief that followed. Through it all, Brooke stood by me. Her steady, unwavering presence reminded me of the man I used to be, before Natalie chipped away at my confidence and left me questioning my worth. Brooke became my anchor, pulling me back to solid ground. At first, our time together felt innocent, grabbing lunch here and there or going for walks to clear our heads. But as the weeks passed, something deeper began to take root. That connection we'd brushed aside years ago quietly resurfaced, growing stronger with every moment we shared. Before long, Brooke and I made the decision to move in together. It wasn't impulsive, it just felt right. Almost like the universe was handing us the second chance we never thought we'd get. Natalie, of course, didn't take the news well. The day she found out, she bombarded me with furious texts, throwing accusations of betrayal in my direction. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't bother replying. Natalie's voice no longer held any weight in my life. Living with Brooke brought me a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. There was no rush, no pressure to prove anything to each other. We were both cautious, still nursing the wounds left behind by the storm that was Natalie. But there was an unspoken understanding between us. A quiet reassurance that came from knowing we didn't need to hide or pretend. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt hopeful about where life might take me. And that hope, fragile as it was, felt like a step in the right direction.